Anyone else? Nobody? Wow, I got 2 summers? Oh, this was an easy one. These are the most fertile presidents. John Tyler had 15 kids, but it took him 2 wives to do it. And no, the first wife did not die in childbirth. They had their first 8 kids. He had his first 8 kids between 1815 and 1830. And then his first wife, Letitia, died while he was president in 1842 in the White House. John Tyler was the first vice president to succeed to the presidency when William Henry Harrison, number 2, died in office. And after 30 days, yeah, because, well, he didn't know enough to come in out of the rain. And then John Tyler's wife became the first president's wife to die in office. And then in 1844, John Tyler became the first president to get married while he was president. And after he retired, he and the new wife had another 7 kids. His youngest child, Pearl Tyler, died 157 years after he was born. So it's interesting that Tyler was Harrison's successor. Hayes was Garfield's successor. And those are the fertile ones. And then 6 each, Jefferson, Taylor, both Roosevelts, and the senior Bush. At the other end of the spectrum, there are several presidents who had no children whatsoever. So, electoral votes in 5 elections, records of 4 and 1, both were born in the 20th century. Well, they were both in the 20th century. Now we got a couple of hands. Hold it, keep it to yourself. Let everybody else catch up, because there are a couple more hints. Think about this one for a minute. That's an easy one. What?
These are vice presidents.
These are the shortest terms. Yeah. Harrison was never vice president. He was the oldest president elected up to that point. He was 68 years old. And it was a bitterly cold winter in 1841, and it was a nasty, bitter, rainy day on March 4th, and Harrison was going to show the world that he was strong and vibrant enough to be president even though he was 68. He spoke for 2 hours in the driving rain without a hat, without a coat, caught pneumonia and died 30 days later. Which means that his wife, Anna Harrison, is the only first lady never to be in the national capital while she was first lady. Because the weather was miserable that year. She said, screw it, I'm staying home in Ohio. When it gets nice in the spring, I'll come up to the Capitol with you. And he died 30 days later. They weren't together, and she never got to live in the White House. Garfield was assassinated, but he took 2 months to die. He was waiting for a train July 2nd, July 4th? July 2nd, 1881, in Washington. He was actually going to visit his wife, who was sick and convalescing in New Jersey, when he got shot. By a guy who said, wait a minute, you got elected, you were supposed to appoint me to an office. The guy Garfield didn't know, but, and he lingered for 2 months and actually didn't die of the gunshot wounds, but rather of the gangrene that set in after the physician's dirty hands kept probing him, looking for the bullet that they couldn't find. Taylor also died in office, as did Harding, and Ford's the only one on the list who didn't die in office. He's the only one to become president when the previous president resigned. Sorry?
Yeah. Isn't he the only unelected?
The only unelected president? Well, he wasn't elected president. He's the only one to be president who wasn't elected president or vice president. Yes. He was the first appointed under the terms of the 25th Amendment when we decided that, gosh, there ought to be a way to replace the vice president if there's a vacancy there. Because up until that time, there wasn't. So when John Tyler became president on April 4th, well, actually April 6th, 1841, it took him a little time to get to the Capitol, there was no vice president for 3 years and 11 months. That's just the way we did it up till then.
Isn't it also the source of what was said that being vice president isn't worth a bucket of wall stick? Because you do, that would be...
That was Theodore Roosevelt's vice president.
Right.
Many of them have said that. Even John Adams said the job wasn't really all that important, and yet it's sometimes turned out to be supremely important. It's all what you make of it. So, okay, one more clue. One is a Democrat, and one's a Republican, and now I'm sure half of you have got this one, so hold it just a minute. John Tyler, Andrew Johnson, William King, Harry Truman, and Theodore Roosevelt. Anyone know what this list is?
Friends of William King.
No, then James Buchanan would be on the list. Sorry?
No.
Yeah, President King served when? I'm sorry.
Took over after assassinations.
No, they did not take over after assassinations. President King, we didn't have a President King. We might have if George Washington had stuck around for a third term, but we got vice presidents. These are the vice presidents who served the shortest terms. Tyler and Johnson both succeeded to the presidency when their presidents died in office. King is the shortest serving vice president who didn't succeed to the presidency. And until I'd been writing the book, King had just been a name on a list to me. You know, list of the vice presidents. I didn't really notice much, except he had a short term. As I started researching the book, I found he was actually kind of interesting, more for what happened to him than for what he actually did. He'd served in the Senate on and off for about 20 years before he got elected vice president. And when he was elected vice president in 1852 with Franklin Pierce, he was sick with terminal tuberculosis. He was dying. They won the election in 1852, and he resigned his seat in the Senate and said, you know what, I'm going to Cuba because I hear it's got a different climate there and maybe it'll help me get better. And he went down to Cuba for a couple of months. Inauguration Day was the 4th of March, 1853. He wasn't home. He didn't get back.
Was he from Louisiana?
Yes, he was. No, he was not. I'm sorry. He was from Alabama. Alabama.
Because there was a senator.
He was. That's what I'm saying. He was a senator.
Buchanan's,
You're skipping ahead of me. I was going to say that. You're saying, go ahead. He was Buchanan's what?
Kate Parker.
Okay. For those who did not hear, there were rumors that Vice President King and President James Buchanan, at the time they were both serving in the Senate, were in fact lovers. James Buchanan is the only president never to marry. William King is the only vice president never to marry. There were rumors, we don't actually have proof of these things, but a lot of the evidence points to the fact that they were a couple. They seemed to do their jobs fairly well, other than the vice presidency. King was off in Cuba while he didn't get inaugurated. But a couple of weeks after Inauguration Day, the Senate got together and said, hey, you know, he's a buddy of ours. He was here for 20 years. He was president pro tem several times. Congress passed a special resolution allowing him to take the oath of office on foreign soil. So 2 weeks after Inauguration Day, William King was sworn in as vice president in Cuba, the only national office holder to take the oath in a foreign country. In April, he said, well, gosh, I want to go home. And he took a trip and he went back to Alabama, got home on the 16th of April and died on the 18th. He's the only vice president never to get to the national capital while he was in office. So James Buchanan was, if you want to consider it, a widow for 4 years. Widower, thank you. James Buchanan, by the way, is the only president born in Pennsylvania, where we are now. And he got himself elected in 1856, served for 4 years, retired, and lived on to 1868.
Buried in Lancaster.
Buried in Lancaster. Well, he's from Pennsylvania.
His home is in Lancaster, too.
And I still haven't made it there. I'm going to one of these days.
You're not missing much. I grew up in Lancaster. I've been there on many field trips.
Well, once I started doing the book, I realized I really ought to visit as many of these places as I could. So I'm getting that slowly done. Excuse me. And then, you know, Harry Truman and Franklin Roosevelt had short terms, and then each got elected their own terms as president. So,